Welcome to the Intentional Health for Women podcast. I'm your host, Garrett GQ Query. This podcast is dedicated to developing intentional health for women. Former 400-pound fat man turned health and fitness professional, specializing in women's health. In this podcast, you will find over a decade of experience in the health and fitness industry, serving women to become their most intentional self through strength training, nutrition, and lifestyle practices. Each week, we will dive into a variety of different topics, ranging from interviews with women leading the way in the health and fitness industry, client case studies throughout the years, myth busting, social media trends, female hormones, gut health, and so much more. We are not normal. We are intentional. Welcome to another episode of the Intentional Health for Women podcast. I'm your host, Garrett GQ Query, and today I'm joined by Christina. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure to have, coordinate this and get everything lined up. So, Christina, it's actually really unique. The introduction that was made that, brought you on the show, and just like having a chance to kind of look into your background. I'm just such a huge advocate of mental health. I've definitely struggled with my fair share of mental health and well-being throughout the years, and definitely have a lot of opinions around the topic. Give us a little introduction, how long, because you therapist / coach.
Yeah. So in 2010, I graduated from Arizona State with a master's in marriage and family therapy. And prior to that, I had worked in the behavioral health field. So I began practicing. Funny, in 2010, I also started teaching group fitness classes because I was a dancer my whole life. I cheered in college. I've always been in that kind of active space. So I began to find my feet in the world of therapy, and really was drawn to food and body obsession and eating disorders. Trauma, because the two go hand in hand, and codependency, because they all play well in the sand together. So I've worked in almost every level of care when it comes to eating disorder treatment, as well as worked in actually here in Arizona, the Crimes Against Children's Unit of the Phoenix Police Department as a therapist. There's a group out here called Child Help. Shout out to them. They're specialists in working with these high profile child abuse cases as therapists to provide treatment for those kiddos. And so I've worked in intensive outpatient, and I say moonlighted in inpatient, where if they needed a therapist, I'd come and run groups and stuff. And interestingly, if you've ever run any sort of fitness group, you talk to your members afterwards, and they say, well, what do you do outside of here? I work as an eating disorder therapist, or I run body image groups. And the conversation that I would have with your everyday woman about their own relationship with their bodies was telling. But it wasn't enough to meet a DSM criteria, but it really was an emotional struggle for them. And we see this in most people in the weight loss journey, is that there's this pattern of, losing a ton of weight, gaining it back, or being super lean, hating the image they see in the mirror. So I'd hear a lot of this. And, for me, because of my own story, I began to actually get burnt out. A lot of my own stuff started coming up, and it was affecting my life and my relationships. So I ended up going through a bad breakup, and was sitting on my couch and was like, okay, I'm a therapist, but I'm doing all these things that are not who I want to be, and I need to go get some help myself. So I ended up in my own spiritual journey / healing journey. And because of what I learned, I realized being a therapist specifically with that relationship with the client was not for me. I was recognizing my boundaries, and my trauma was coming up. And so I left, actually went into sales. Went into sales for 5 years, absolutely crushed, because obviously I know people and how they work. But my calling, honestly, I really do feel like I have this gift. I've been mentored by some pretty phenomenal people, is in helping others. That's my gift. So how can I do this in a way that works for me in my boundaries? And during this time, I'm doing my certification. I always coached in some facet, whether that was, small group fit, boot camp, in person. So that was just kind of my hobby, if you will. So I did my certifications in personal training and nutrition coaching, started dabbling in the in-person and online space, and thought, what if we put these two things together? Because of those ladies that I would have those conversations with, a little less than 10 years prior. So the mindset of matter, actually, my Ignite Ambition coaching, which was just a life coaching program, started first. Then the mindset of matter came out of that, where we take everything that I've learned both from my own healing journey and my education and experience as an eating disorder, or the way I like to explain it is food and body obsession specialist, put it into a program that also allows for the education around what does food look like, our relationship with food, our relationship with our bodies, and more importantly, ourselves. What does that look like as we're unraveling all of the internal stories that have kept us from prioritizing ourselves or obtaining our goals or living in a body that we respect? Don't use the word love, I use the word respect. And so it's been since 2019 that we started, and it's myself and there's 5 of us all together. All my coaches have to have some sort of background in behavioral health, and or they have worked with me directly, because we get a lot of coaches in our program that are like, wait, that's me. And we help women and men now all over the world recreate and redefine what does health look like for them from the inside out.
Very cool. Yeah. I think that's such a huge piece, right? Because like the more as I've grown as a coach over the years, I was 400 pounds at 19.
I saw your story.
Like not only like does mental health play a huge role in like things that we've been through, but also is just like environment, right? Like family dynamics play such a huge role. And I think that that's something as simple as even last night, like it was funny, is I'm a part of like a men's Bible study, and the men in my group and at my table, a couple of them from Arkansas, a couple of them are 27, 29 years old, and they were discussing like the possibility of like is it time for me to move home? And for me personally, like I'm from Minnesota, it's definitely crossed my mind in the 6 years that I've been here, but something that I'm really passionate about and like align with as far as like my church goes is like the importance of like men understanding like their role in like a family dynamic and like leading their family. And like if you are spiritual in the sense of like Christianity and Bible teaching, like you look back in Genesis, it says, you leave your mother and father and you go and start your own family. And like, that's been a big topic over the last couple months in our sermons, is like talking about like different family dynamics as far as like enmeshed and codependent and very just not good, completely isolated, like you just left your family completely, and then like an actual healthy of like, hey, like I got married to my wife and I have my kids and I am this family dynamic, right? And then like you and mom and dad, you guys are your own family unit, and then sister and whoever, and like this is, and like we can all coexist and come together, but like we're not enmeshed in one another's lives. We're not like impacting that. And I think like I'm sure you see this all the time, given your kind of tagline and who you are targeting, is that can really like mess up someone's like health, well-being, fitness journey, is like that codependency.
Absolutely.
And I think that's actually like a great starting point, is kind of going into that. And I think that's a really valuable piece, is like, what does that look like? What do you see in your practice actively with how like messed up that can be, especially with like, I feel like this can really be an issue in like family units where maybe there is an only child, where there does become a lot of codependency amongst mom, dad, only child. And then when the child does get married and they're trying to cleave and separate and go into their own family unit and start to create that family unit, and how that can really impact someone's like health and fitness journey in so many different ways.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So I'm a true believer that, it's not what happened to us, but what we make up about ourselves or the stories we create around what happened to us.
Yeah.
And trauma, a lot of people will hear that word and think, sexual abuse, war, car accident, death of a parent, something like that. But more often, the people who come into my program are, as we call it, death by 1,000 paper cuts trauma, where something bad didn't happen to them, but when something good should have happened, it wasn't there. Okay? So I'll give you examples where we have an opportunity to, as I'm not a parent, but parents have an opportunity to regulate their children's emotions if they have emotional maturity, right? Kids are spontaneous. They are not moderate with their emotions, and it's the family's job, to parents specifically, to teach those children how to moderate their emotions. But if that parent doesn't know how to do that, there was an opportunity missed to teach, right? If you have a parent who is an addict, you have a parent who is depressed, you have a family, couple that is going through a divorce and doesn't have a great boundary system, then we create enmeshment. We create parentified children. Maybe you're the youngest of a very large sibling group, and you get put into a position to take care of your siblings. That is going to create a parentified child. And what happens is it's the story we create about ourselves. So we'll use the first example of not having emotional regulation. A few things can come out of that. My emotions don't matter, right? Or my emotions are wrong. She's telling me I should feel this way, but I don't feel this way. So now I don't trust myself, right? In the enmeshed child, my needs are not important. Everyone else's needs are important. I'm not going to be taken care of. And I not only am not going to be taken care of, I didn't learn the skills, but I should know the skills in an effort to take care of everyone else, right? Got it?
Yep.
Okay. I only get praise. I only am seen and heard from when I score the goal or I do the dance routine. That was my story. When I'm performing. So I only receive love if I'm achieving. And when I'm being a kid and having the emotion or the meltdown, I'm getting criticism, right? And that family unit, it's not just the unit, it's how strong. I want to go back to faith. The way I believe systems of families should be is if you do have a spiritual connection, your connection to God and you is number one. Your connection to self outside of that. Your connection to your partner and yours connection as a parental unit. So now we have couple, then couple as parents, then children.
Yep.
Right? Because in our, as we've evolved as humans, we've actually gotten further away and more isolated as family systems, whereas back in the day, we used to have, they say it takes a village to raise a child. We used to roll in villages. Yeah. Meaning anytime I needed something, there was someone safe to go to because we all hung out together. We did everything together. Whereas now there's a lot of isolation in that. We have parents that are working. And I want to explain, whenever I say parents, I'm not saying you chose this for your child or your parents chose this for you. We just knew what we knew and we did what we did.
We do the best we can with what we
exactly.
Like, it's my family dynamic is, unique as anybody's, right? Like everybody has their own experiences. Is like my parents had me at 18 years old. I lost my mom at 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
Like, and looking back, like both my dad and my mom, they did the best that they could.
Right.
Even something that over the past 3 years that I have had to walk through and unpack and why I've chosen the church that I've chosen is I've recognized that my dad was not the leader that I want to become. I cannot look to him for that. I cannot go to him for that advice. And that is not, I don't say that with blame. Actually, during the sermon last night, I need to send my dad a text message of I need to send him a text message thanking him for the generational curses that I am very aware of that he broke. But that is as far as he could take it.
Right.
In the years that he was my, caretaker, right? Mm-hmm. In that dynamic. Does that make him wrong? Does that make him bad? Does that make no? Like he showed up. He was a father at 18. Mm-hmm. He didn't bail.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But he did the best that he could with what he had, right?
Yeah. When I talk to my clients about this, I want them to see their family system with a sense of empathy.
Yeah.
Right? Because having the blame and being the victim, that keeps us very stuck.
Exactly.
Right? But, just to go back to that, we very much isolated ourselves. We have working parents, we have young parents, we have single parents, we have the only child, right? Because we've seen an increase in issues with like fertility or just people choosing not to have children, and all of those dynamics, not on top of the lack of emotional awareness and really the lack of mental health and the generations before us not seeing that as something important, really does create environments where children are not, their needs are not being met. And what they're going to do is make up the stories that when I'm perfect, I'm good. When I'm achieving, I'm good. When I'm taking care of others, I'm good. When my needs don't matter. I need to adjust how I am and be a chameleon so that I can make sure everyone else is happy, right? They learn these. And what I, in my program, call them, they're your managers or your protectors. They help you stay relevant. They help you receive love. They help you receive safety. Mm-hmm. The problem with those, though, is they burn out because they're not true to the self. Mm-hmm. So then we see things like binge eating, restrictive eating, body image, picking yourself apart, dissociating, numbing, addiction coming in to kind of put out the fires of when those protectors burn out. The problem with those is that we have a lot of negative feelings, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame around those behaviors. And that's only bringing up the wounds from our childhood. So we just repeat that cycle over and over and over again. And that's why we see so much in this space, people losing weight, gaining it back, or, you've had a few guests on here with eating disorders, right? And going so extreme in changing their bodies in hopes that and not every person has this idea who has an eating disorder. If I look a certain way, I'll receive love, or even the restriction of food. If I was abused, sexually abused too, restriction or binging of food is a protective mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. But we have so much shame around that. And I truly believe that those behaviors are solutions to a problem we're not addressing, which is our deepest wounds and our wounded self, and the protective mechanisms, the perfectionism, the overachievement, the all or nothing mindset that came out of that. And that's ultimately what I do with my clients, on top of giving them the habits that now mimic or will mimic where I want them to eventually be. So that's the family dynamics we don't realize shapes us. It shapes us, and even it affects us in so many ways. I'm a true believer that your systems, your nervous system, digestive, endocrine, and immune system are not four separate, that they're one system. Yeah. We see it I'm an EMDR trained therapist, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And we saw in veterans a high amount of type 2 diabetes without any sort of behavior that would constitute that diagnosis. And it's really because they're in that fight or flight or freeze all of the time that the body says, okay, I don't need anything from here down right now. So I'm just going to freeze it. Normally, we get out of that flight and we come back down, all systems are a go. But if you're stuck there because of, now this is obviously big T trauma I'm talking about, but if you're stuck there, those systems even will be affected by it. So we're not just seeing it as the weight loss, but we're seeing it as health.
Well, because the thing is, so it's funny that you went there so I have a client who, we're coming up on 12 weeks working together. And initially when they onboarded, and this is a 42-year-old woman, picture perfect hormones, picture perfect thyroid, some of the best labs I've ever seen, and a 6-pack. She's like, Garrett, I can't get my legs to lean out. Mm-hmm. And initially, as I onboarded her as a coach from like the personal training background, like all of the education from like more so like a physiological standpoint that I've done, it's like, oh, well, you're like your food doesn't match like your output. We just need to feed you more food. Your body will calm down. We should drop inflammation. We should see these things happen. And then we got labs back, and to your point of, you know, veterans dealing with type 2 diabetes, she was developing insulin resistance. Like her insulin was 12.9. And to those of you who maybe don't know, like optimal insulin is like 125. So this is a huge red flag. And like I always say is like, you know, everybody's physiology is different and it's going to break in different ways. So like to your point with what, you know, Christina just talked about as far as like veterans going towards type 2 diabetes is it's this heavy amount of mental trauma. Our bodies don't know any different between you train too much, you underfeed, or
you're running from a bear.
Yeah, you're running from a bear, or in a veteran standpoint, hey, like you went through war and here is all this unprocessed trauma that's constantly filling your stress bucket and overfilling it every single day to the degree that we are dealing with, you know, this constant stress that can break the like metabolic system. Or in some people's cases, it will break their hormone system and it will shut down testosterone production. Or for women specifically, I would argue this is where we're seeing so much thyroid issues with women, right? Is once that stress bucket is full and it's overflowing, stuff is going to start to break, and physiology doesn't care. Like it, and everybody's physiology is different. It's just going to break something different.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, and to touch on that, you know, a lot of who I would call mentors, even though they don't know me, they all speak about this and how trauma, like we've seen such an increase in autoimmune issues with women. And women specifically, and some of the more recent research that I listened to, these doctors, Dr. Gabor Mate being one of them. He explains, like, you know, we can actually look at the personality of someone, and before even knowing their labs, just analyze them in a lab. And because someone is, when they're too nice, and they have a hard time saying no, and they have that demeanor about them, we know they are more likely to have an autoimmune issue because they've not been able to express what is normal in their bodies, express their emotion, set boundaries, so on and so forth. And he talks about how, you know, that is such a stress in the body of this natural thing wanting to happen, which is emoting yourself and having emotions, being pushed down and pushed down and pushed down. Right. And I would say that would be the freeze of the fight, flight, freeze, or please, as I say, that the body is, as you're saying, the physiology is happening in this way. And they're seeing, and this is why we've seen an increase in autoimmune issues. Well, I can't say the number one reason, but there's a lot of new research that is directed towards, let's also look at the mental health and where it's at, because this person could be, you know, the epitome of health, but they're having all of these issues. So let's also bring that. The way I explain it is easy for the listeners is we've walked around like the headless horseman for decades. Like our head is out here and our body's here, and we've not connected them both. And it's so important to realize like that is not true. And that is why we're seeing the increase in thyroid issues, infertility, autoimmune struggles, and so on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's, you know, while you were walking through that, like we look back at like human history, it's like, why are we seeing all these issues now, comparatively speaking? And when I sit back and I think about it, it's like, number one, like you could argue probably awareness testing wasn't available.
Give it to them.
However, our lifestyle has completely changed. We spend so much time inside, secluded, away from community.
False lighting or
Yeah, like the list goes on, right? And now it's just like, so that's like mental health has become such a huge focal point of needing to be aware of it, because it's like everything is stacked against us when it comes to trying to keep an optimal mental health space. Whereas you look at even 100, 200 years ago, right? Like your biggest stress was bear breaking down your cabin door.
Right.
Like that's it. Or, you know, a drought or things like that. Like we manage more stress in like an 8-hour day than like our ancestors managed in a 5-year time frame.
Right.
Something I read recently that I'll be curious to hear. So with your background in EMDR, and this was really like transformative to me. It's kind of funny how this has played out, right? Is like me reading this, having you in, is I read something recently from the holistic psychologist. Is she was talking about how
walking.
Yes, walking. And for me, I worked on a gym floor for 8 years. I didn't really do a lot of walking because I did 15 to 20,000 steps every single day, 5 days a week doing my career. I didn't need to make that a conscious practice. But as I stepped away from the in-person stuff, stepped into online only, I knew immediately, I was like, oh, like we got to make this a conscious practice. And something that I've noticed, and I even posted about this a couple of weeks ago, is like very few times over the last couple of years have I stopped walking. But when I do, I get rudely reminded extremely quickly. I'm like, why am I an angry prick? Like, why can I not manage my emotions?
Yeah.
What is going on? And I'm like, oh, I'm not walking. Oops.
Yes. It's insane.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
But then when I read that there's an ability to connect left and right brain, it was just an immediate, I'm like, this is something that I am going to scream at my clients for the next decade.
Yes.
Go for a walk.
Yes.
Go for a walk with no music. Go out in nature, no phone. Don't put headphones in. Just go out, walk, and allow that connection between left and right brain so you can process emotions. Like, and it just like, I've been actively in therapy for the last 2 years, given some things that I was going through. It makes so much sense, like why, hey, this go round with therapy was way more successful. Because I was sitting there actively processing every single day.
Yeah. No, and we have to think about it too. When we're out in nature, we're getting some sunshine, we have fresh air. I live by a mountain, so I get the beauty of the mountain and the creatures and the flowers, and I get to look around. That's just calming in itself. Then we do this bilateral kind of looking around. We have sounds going, from side to side, just naturally. That's ultimately what EMDR is bilateral stimulation. So it's happening naturally in nature. I can't tell you how many times I'm on walks and I have the best freaking thoughts or like ideas. Or my dad right now is fighting stage 4 lung cancer. And when I first found out, I was just gutted. I was numb, but I still went on my walks, and I had one of the most peaceful and I would say, I'll just say helpful, for lack of a better term, conversations with myself in that walk, that I have no regrets with my dad. We've had a wonderful life together. A lot of people don't get that opportunity, and they try to play catch up when such diagnosis happens. And it calmed the shit out of me. To this day, he's in the hospital right now.
Yeah.
To this day. And so not only being able to process the hard stuff, but sometimes it's business even, and getting wonderful ideas, because my brain is using both sides, my creative side and my logic side, right? But yes, walk. I have clients in like Canada and different countries where it's very cold. I'm like, get out there anyways.
So on that note, I'm a Minnesota kid, born and raised. Like, there's a reason I live in the state of Arizona, born and raised in Minnesota, dealt with undiagnosed hypothyroidism for 8 years. Like, I left for a reason, but on that same token, I spent an entire month back home in Minnesota, and I started 75 Hard last year at home on purpose.
To get your ass outside.
I did 21 days of 75 Hard back home. And if you're unfamiliar with the program, you are required to do 45-minute workout outside. My preferred workout outside is my daily walk. That is what I did. Bundle up and go outside. It is not an excuse.
Right. I agree.
I did it every day. And there was a good 10 days of those 21 days, it was minus 10 below zero.
My husband and I traveled the country for 16 months and stayed in ski towns for a good 4 months. And I never missed a walk. And I will tell you, they were actually some of my favorite walks because just happened to be location, but there was a creek. So this beautiful creek. So the sounds from that, walking in the snow, it's crisp, sun's out, but not like here.
No.
Some of my favorite walks actually was when it was snowing. You just got to bundle up.
You just bundle up and you go. And it's to me, it's such a sad excuse, just go outside, just do it, bundle up. Like, you have the coat, it's not that big of a deal. Put on some mittens, put on some neck protection, cover your face, like, go outside. Like, I have countless pictures of like my beard just like covered in icicles. Like, it's fine.
Can I just interrupt real quick? You know, one of the things I want to say to the listener is, you're like, yeah, that sounds easy enough for you. It doesn't have to be a specific way. You can walk up and down your driveway if you need to and stay close to the kids or close to the home. People get in this rigid, well, it wasn't the 45-minute walk like you talked about. Maybe it's you do that after every meal, or you do that, you know, when the kids are whatever. It doesn't have to be this rigid thing that, I go on my 45-minute walk, which I do every day because I have a 1-year-old dog, right? And she's, you know, she doesn't get her walk. She lets me know. You know, but also I really much enjoy them. But it doesn't have to be so, you know, this rigid thing. You can walk up and down. I had a client literally walk up and down her driveway, and she'd get 10,000 steps somehow. She'd walk around her house. But of course, I told her, I want you outside and getting some sunshine.
100% on that. You touched my great aunt, one of my favorite humans, did adult foster care for years. And a lot of the people that she would get would be morbidly obese on 16 medications. Like, that whole system that's a whole different story.
We can have a whole different podcast.
she was known for changing people's lives in that regard. And when you look at it, you're talking like adult foster care, you're talking about some sort of typically mental disability that makes you need to be under the care of the state. Well, she had a lady that was in her home that came, type 2 diabetic, 16 medications, morbidly obese. In under 18 months, between simply portion control, 3 meals per day, controlled snack every day, and she started her walking out on the four-season porch. Back and forth.
Yep.
And in a matter of, it was like 90 days, she was then walking a mile, and then it was 2, and then it was 3. And before you know it, she had lost like 90 pounds and was down to like 2 medications.
Yeah. It's that simple. But we make it this bigger thing because of, you know, kind of coming back to the beginning of our conversation. I've got to, you know, grind and work hard or be perfect or do all of these things. And that's so far from the truth. And that's a wonderful example, and also a wonderful example of how just walking and movement in that way, it doesn't have to be intense and crazy, can be super beneficial for others.
Absolutely.
And she cared, you know, you said she's one of your favorite humans. She just probably has a lot of compassion and empathy. And for that person, that might have been the first time in their lives that someone didn't judge them negatively right? And provided a space for them to be human, right? I'm guessing if she's your favorite human, she's got some of those qualities. That makes a difference.
Great.
Yeah. Who is she?
Who is she? Mm-hmm. Oh, she's my great aunt. She's the best.
Love it.
Yeah. The walk, I mean, to like put a bow on that, like the walking is just like, it's not just the health, like that really changed. That really was a huge paradigm shift, right? Like for me, when I read that, it's like, it's so funny over the years, like as I've grown as a coach, like how many things that I've just like been intuitive about of like, hey, this is good and it's good for these reasons. It's good for mental health, but never being able to label it. But then as I continue to learn more, all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Right.
It's like, and so like, I think that's something to advocate for people, like as you are. Because a lot of times, like I feel, if you found your space where you're really uncomfortable in your own skin and you know that you're unhealthy, like this isn't just like an opinion, it's just simply a matter of fact, right? Like I've had a unique opportunity for the last like 16, 17 months, and I've been fortunate enough to read like 2,000 lab panels in that time frame. And I have to have a lot of really hard kind of come to Jesus conversations of like, look, you need to lose 30 pounds. You need to lose 40.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it ever you need to gain?
Oh, yeah.
Weight?
Where?
Or back off?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
The insulin resistance lady, right? That was 100%. Like, as soon as I got her labs back, I was like, hey, you're not going to like me, but this is the answer to your problem.
Isn't that the harder conversation sometimes than the you need to lose 30 pounds as you were implying and going into?
Oh, it's way harder because it's like, I even had, there's one conversation in my DMs that has been going on recently I had with a lady, and like, she was like, we were discussing, potentially like working together. And she's like, this is just stupid. She's like, I've consumed a lot of information and I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that I need to do less, but it shouldn't work that way. She's like, more effort should equal more results. And I'm like, nope, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't,
not how it works.
Doesn't work out that way.
And that's why we've been fed that.
Yeah.
Right. And again, if I have that perfectionistic, do as much as possible mentality, then I'm going to work out I was this person, work out 6-7 days a week, 1,300 calories. And for me, because I have been active since the age of 3, yes, I saw a response, but I'm 42 and it doesn't work for me anymore. Right. And realizing that, and this is something people do all the time, they don't realize the same energy to manage their home, think in their career, drive a car, smile at someone, plan their day, is the same bucket of energy that physical activity comes out of. And if what we're putting into that bucket is incredibly restrictive and we're taking so much out, what do we think the body is going to do? But a lot of people think energy only correlates or stimulates the physical, meaning food. Our food only is giving us energy for the physical part of us, but there's all these cognitive, emotional, spiritual energy, right? That's social energy. I think Jordan talked about her social battery. I don't know if she talked about it here. That's all coming from the same place. And eventually we're pulling from nothing and your body's going to respond.
Yeah. It's, me and Jordan have that in common to a degree. Obviously I did not and have not gone through cancer and into that extreme, but like I have some theories around like thyroid conditions, hypothyroidism specifically, is, and especially after reading as many lab panels as I have, and we discussed earlier, like that specific client, right? Like I literally, like, here's the thing, okay, right? So 42-year-old woman, similar, like it almost kind of like, as you just said, now knowing your age and seeing your progress pictures like recently of like where you were at, right? Like you did look good. You had like 4 abs popping out, relatively lean to majority of America. They'd be like, yeah, like this lady's got it figured out.
Right.
But the reality is you felt like dog shit.
Yep. I walked into, this is when I was in sales, I walked into a call and he said, you look like shit.
Yeah.
You know? So I not only felt like shit, but physically didn't look normal. But yeah.
Bet you had pale skin.
I mean, I just was gaunt.
Yep.
I looked older than I am now. And that was, what, 7, 9 years ago? It's crazy. But she sounds very similar in that.
Like, I reduced her training to 2 days a week. I pulled all of her cardio. She is allowed 12 to 15,000 steps. And that's it.
Did you reverse her?
She didn't really, you know what's funny? So we are kind of now. She didn't really need reversing. Like, for a woman, she was actually eating a decent amount of food, right? Like 2,000, 2,200. But comparatively speaking, and what I've learned about women's physiology with working with them hands-on, like I've had some of my female athletes smashing 3,500 calories. So even when you have a female athlete come to you and they're eating 2,000 to 2,200, and while that's better than most, it may still not be even remotely enough.
Right. I ask that question because oftentimes that's something we have to do.
Yeah.
You know, and getting someone who's been on a diet their whole life, or at least in their minds thinking they're in a calorie deficit, say, hey, we're actually going to eat more and I need you to trust the process. And obviously there's a conversation had beforehand to begin to gain that trust and really explaining like, okay, you know how to do it your way.
Yeah.
You have all of the signs and symptoms of what your way looks like. Do you feel really, really confident in doing your way? Yep, I can. You can probably do it like you know it like the back of your hand. So we know we can always come back to that if we wanted to. We don't want to, but I'm going to use that. Yeah. So why don't we try my way? Give me 4 months and trust the process. And the nice thing is, and when that inner critic voice, when that perfectionism comes up, you actually get to process that part too, which again, not everyone has that opportunity in their coaching. And so then they start eating more and guessing with this gal, working out less, she ate relatively high, eating more, moving less. And now they're starting to feel first, right? Feel it energy wise. We're starting to see it in the gym, and then we start seeing it in our physique.
Yeah. So I did drop down because of the insulin concern. I actually did drop her food a little bit. Dropped her food a little bit, but slowly but surely, we actually have been building food back up, and we're about roughly on average what she was at before. But again, we massively reduced. She's dropped 8 pounds.
Wow.
Now, majority of it is actually inflammation, and you can see her legs are now lean.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the legs.
Her legs are now lean. And like, for someone who is walking around with a 6-pack, like her waistline is just itty bitty now, just like night and day difference, really, really small. And that's been a really just like fun process to like walk through and see. And we were able to like actual data. We dropped insulin from 12.9 to 7.1, and we dropped A1C from 5.3 to 4.9 in 4 weeks.
Wow. It's amazing.
Massive shifts. So now it's like, okay, cool. We've massively dropped, and now we're slowly but surely titrating food back in, and then slowly but surely we will begin to add in a little bit more activity, but in a more controlled manner, and make sure that nutrition supports level of output, etc., and like really get to start to chase some goals now.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's such a wonderful lesson for women to hear because, I'm lucky enough to have my own experience. And I will tell you too, when I was that lean in that picture, I'd already worked in the eating disorder industry. Like I had already done a lot of my own healing, but what I wasn't healing is that belief around what my body needed to look like. I was a dancer since age 3.
Yeah.
I've always had it, abs. Yeah. And I put a lot of my worth into looking a certain way. So that was an aha moment. Like I feel terrible. I'm still doing these things. Why? And I got curious with myself. And through education of, the reverse diet, this wasn't talked about back then. No. I think this is relatively, it was, but not in the spaces that I was in.
Yep.
And, I would say within the past 5 years, it's become a conversation. But this was even before it became a conversation, like learning to reverse diet, really honing in on my training and like focusing on strength training, walking, right? No cardio. I used to do like all the HIIT classes and all the things 7 days a week, and then go to the gym and lift, right? And I'd wonder why my best friend who, yes, she did CrossFit, which also can be very stressful on the body. Yeah. I wonder why she lifted more than me, but I'm working out more than her. I don't understand, right? I don't get it. But I was able to do both the work mentally and physically. And now at 2,400 calories, I'm very strong in the gym. I'm at the 88th percentile when it comes to lean mass for a 42-year-old woman. My bone health is 25 years old. Every single marker. I will say, my hormones, I did have a hysterectomy at 35. Mm-hmm. So that's a bit of it's a tough, like taking the tests, like doing the hormonal testing can be tough to gauge because I don't know where I'm at anytime. Yep. So I'm still trying to figure that part out, but I don't necessarily have, other than what my estrogen, my LSH, my estrogen, and I'm forgetting the other one, FSH, that show me being in perimenopause. I don't have anything else that like symptomatic that shows me that. So, and I truly believe it's because I take care of my muscle, my brain, of course, my stress, how I'm eating. And I follow very much like a Mediterranean style diet, high fiber, high protein, and I'm thankful that I moved from what I look like to what do I feel like. And that I feel like is really going to help me live longer, be more independent, right? Even if these symptoms do arise, I actually feel like I'll have less intense symptoms, if you will, when that happens. So that's a little bit of my side.
Yeah. What's crazy, to your point, it's amazing that you have, navigated that journey, found that is we're seeing perimenopause start in women as early as 27. Mm-hmm. And like, to drive this home with this conversation, because we've kind of touched on it periodically through this whole episode at this point, is like, your stress bucket has a limit. And it doesn't care where the stress is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's where we can see these issues develop. And so, to your point, like feeding your level of output, all of those things is going to play a massive role in why you're able to manage those hormones, not experience those negative side effects, etc., which is huge. It's massive for your overall well-being and ability to just show up every day.
Yeah.
And it's super critical. I totally spaced what I was like. There was a thought there.
All right. I do it all the time.
Yeah, people, and what's crazy is like sometimes like this too is like where I absolutely love lab data.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to have a conversation with the person in front of you. Because while lab data could indicate the possibility and potential for perimenopause, how do you feel?
Right.
Because like, what is your normal? And that's where like, really, like I advocate for people. It's like, you should be getting, starting at like 28 years old, you should be getting at least yearly lab, if not bi-yearly labs.
Absolutely.
Because like, what is your normal? What, and then we can start to collect a picture over time of like, what is your normal?
Same with your cycle, right? Tracking that. I love the idea of hormones, tracking your cycle and understanding what that normal is. And then when it starts being abnormal, then you see someone like you.
Exactly. Yeah. When it starts to impact your life, then we start to shift gears, and it's like looking at those potential hormone replacement options. And that's another thing that I don't know if I've ever had the opportunity to share on this show is like, you do not have to age like your mom and your grandma.
Mm-hmm.
You don't.
I agree.
Everything that you've been taught by your mom and grandma, like it's common. It was common. It doesn't have to be your normal. You don't have to age that way.
And you don't have to live in a mindset that's that way too.
Yeah.
I'm all about breaking, as you mentioned earlier, the intergenerational trauma, even just around our bodies and food. It's one of the first things we do with our clients is we take an inventory of what it was like growing up for them. How did we use food? What was the focus on food? How did we speak about bodies? How were we praised? How were we seen? How were we heard? How were we criticized? Right? And you'll see talk about the mom and then the grandma and the comments from the aunts and this and that. And both of those things, like you said, the physical aging, but also how we live in that body. Because even menopause had it's like negative when it's going to affect half of our population. And there's nothing we can do about it. It's going to naturally happen.
It's going to happen.
Right? And that's seen as like this negative thing.
Let's go into it like with education and understanding and like, hey, like.
And acceptance.
Yeah, acceptance in that you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a miserable experience.
Right. Agreed. I didn't know we were going to talk about menopause today, but I love it.
Circling back, like you brought up like your dad's story and we did kind of touch on something that I'm really happy that you opened up about but as far as like your walking and how that's impacted you and how it's helped you process, which I think is that in itself is super powerful. But like, how has your background in health and fitness played such a pivotal role while you walk through this season of your life with the loss of your, like it's coming.
Right. Yes. It's a great question. I'm going to touch on it in two ways. So in the past, and when I was in not a great place in my life, before I did my own therapy as a therapist, which all of you listening are therapists. If you're not doing it, please do it.
The best coaches have coaches. The best therapists have therapists. Like plain and simple.
Yes. My own spiritual work too.
Yeah.
I would have drank myself into the ground. I would have restricted myself. I would have restricted all day so that I can drink at night and then go to the gym the next day. I was so disconnected from myself, my emotions, because my whole story was I was alone when I needed people often in my life. In events like what I'm going through now. My great-grandmother passed away in front of me. She had a heart attack while she was watching me. I was alone. My grandmother passed away shortly thereafter. Couldn't go see her. Didn't go to the funeral. I had to grieve alone. My brother got into a very serious accident, was in ICU. My parents are there with him, and I'm kind of just propped around to different family members. I'm alone. And all of this, my mom being the person who lost her great-grandmother, her mother, and also my uncle within the same time, obviously had a toll on her. So when I needed her, I felt alone, right? So how do we cope? We find these ways of protecting ourselves Alcohol didn't come until later, much later. But okay, if I can, show up in a certain way and be seen, right? If I'm dancing and performing and I look good, I get attention. I'm not alone. People are here. They come here to see me, right? But also I learned to figure things out on my own, right? And just kind of learn how to be emotional and learn how to get through life. And that translated into my relationships. I found what I call fixer-uppers of men that I dated that needed me, right? Mm-hmm. So I can take them, because there was a bit of caretaking with my mom. I won't go into that just out of sake of her. And numbing then happened. That was like my fire, like what I call the firefighter, put out the fire of the burnout of trying to be seen, perform, all of that. And alcohol was that. And it wasn't until I went through a breakup, because I was being absolutely obnoxious and mean. And he's like, I can't do this, right? And that's when that whole process started happening of like, oh, maybe it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me, right? So fast forward in that healing, both mentally, understanding why I put other people's needs before my own, why I put so much emphasis on the way I looked, right? Why I really have a hard time still to this day asking for help, right? Because I don't trust anyone's going to be there. Once I started working on the inner process.
Asking for help is the worst.
Listen, I have a visceral response sometimes where I'm like, but we can get into that if you want. And then educating myself on the health and wellness journey, I am able to not only show up for my dad, but I talk to my clients about this. We do some group calls twice a week. And I said, I want to talk about control. And and one of the clients actually used the language internal versus external locus of control. And in the hospital, I've stayed overnight there. I'm still making choices to make myself feel good so I can have the energy to be there for him, because my dad's also blind, by the way. So a blind person being in a hospital is a hard thing in itself. A blind person on oxygen and he keeps desatting, meaning his oxygen's dropping to like in the 70s when he's moving. Like, there's a lot of things, right? I need to take care of myself. Yep. I walk. So just for listeners, when he was in ICU, I showed up at 5 a.m., 5 to 6:45. I'm there with him. They do a shift change. What do? I go out, I walk to first watch, have some breakfast, high protein breakfast, get some good carbs in for me, have some water, have some coffee, talk to people. Talked to this older man the other day. Love that social connection. Social connection is so important. Walk back in the sunshine, hang out with my dad, throw some music on with him. And we danced. He took my hand and we just danced he just did this. That's all he did. But that's something we enjoyed doing, and reminding myself, my brain wants to do the thing of just, I want to crawl in a hole and sleep. But because I've created that foundation, both internally and externally, to number one, quiet that mind. And if I need to rest, I rest too, right? But quiet that numbing, quiet that retreating, as I call it, because remember, I've been alone during these times. So naturally, that's where I want to go. I am present. I'm taking care of myself. And that ultimately helps me show up for him and the rest of my family in, a better way than if I'm, drunk girl. That's my brother's like, I can smell alcohol on you, which was actually something that happened like 15 years ago at a family event. So.
It's crucial. Like, I think that's a great thing to say is like, look at that. Like that, what you just laid out, like, I'm not going to say that it's easy, but it's very simple. Like, you've created a system that allows you to show up for someone else, but also take care of yourself.
Right. At the end of the day, and the spiritual side of things is very important too. I didn't touch on that, but, I wasn't actually alone in any of those times of my life, but I didn't know that, right? And so I have such a strong faith, and so does he. And my dad's a DNR, is do not resuscitate. Yep. And then when he said that, I had so much calm over my body, because I know he's if God wants to take him, he'll take him. And I'm not God. I'm not going to pretend to be, So that's a big part of it as well is I've realized I'm not alone in this ever, even if I'm by myself, Yeah. And I lost a dog, my 15-year-old soul dog, in December. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I just talk to her, and like I just feel better. So it's not an easy process, but if you do it the right way, which again, this industry is not set up for that. And I'm trying to recreate the industry and say, we've got to work from the inside out, right? Because if I didn't have a strong sense of self, nothing matters. Can change the behavior all day. But if I don't believe that I'm worth it or that I deserve it or whatever, our beliefs dictate our behaviors that dictate our outcomes, not vice versa.
Change your identity, change your life.
Mm-hmm.
Some mentors of mine over the years, I'm like permanently ingrained, at least at this point, in one of their courses. Like I'm talked about for, 10 minutes is, because my backstory, spoke to one of my mentors is like, what does it take? Like people don't understand, like I was 400 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
What does it take to go from 400 pounds to, on average, for a decade, I've walked around at 230 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Now that 230 pounds has continually changed over the last decade. But what is like the identity behind that? Like does the 400-pound kid's identity rear his ugly head from time to time? Absolutely.
And I'm proud of you for saying that, because most people wouldn't. They don't admit it.
For sure.
It's a part of the process.
But for the most part, my daily actions don't look anything like that, kids.
Mm-hmm.
Not even close.
Right.
It's early wake-up times. It's drawing boundaries around bedtime. It's like, no, I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to eat this. Like,
mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is like people don't realize is like it's going to be uncomfortable around family.
Yeah.
But my family now knows a decade, 15 years later, like that's just, it's not even a conversation anymore. They don't even try.
Right.
Thank you for, sharing about your dad, because I think that's so impactful, because it can be parlayed into so many things if you're married,
mm-hmm.
if you have children.
That was the second part I was going to say. So many of my clients, they think it needs to be a certain way, right? To implement these things. And that's why I wanted to bring it to their attention is like, no. The way I explain it for your listeners is like an old school boom box, right? Mm. You have these 5 knobs. You have nutrition, you have movement, non-exercise, you have exercise, you have like sleep and recovery, and you have stress and mental health management. We're never turning all of those up full blast. We're never turning them off. But in different seasons of your life, we just adjust, right? So I couldn't do, I brought bands to the hospital, but I'm like, I'm not going to do this. So I took the stairs. He's on the 6th floor, so my exercise, my planned time to exercise was down, wasn't completely off. So when I went home, if I could bust something out for 20 minutes, that was good. Great, right? My nutrition was probably a little down because I wasn't making my meals, but I was choosing foods, making swaps that would serve me. And from an energy perspective, not because I'm going to have some gains that day in muscle. It serves me to have higher protein, higher fiber foods because he may need me for 4 hours, right? So that idea of even in this situation where things are very unknown, you still have a choice. You can still choose you. But again, we get so in this rigid mindset. It's got to be perfect or I'm a failure. If I can't do it all, it doesn't count, right? I've got to put everyone else before myself, right? So I'm very proud of my mom. Today I talked to her. I was like, do you want to come to my house and shower? Like, because she'll be there she was there last night, the night before. And she's like, actually, I'm just going to go home. I'm like, great, I will take over. Good job. It's very hard for Cindy.
Mom.
Very hard for Cindy to let others take over, but she's been good about that.
Awesome.
So
everyone gets asked this, and I feel like we've maybe covered on this, but hopefully this will spark something for you. It is the Intentional Health for Women podcast. As you step into this coming season of your life, what is ways that you are looking to live with intention?
Live with intention. I've said this on my own podcast that I want to always emulate the client, right? And who I'm trying to help that client to be. Now, obviously, that is going to be different. But I think a lot of times in this industry, like you'll see someone look a certain way, but their behaviors and what's happening behind the scenes is not. Okay? So, the example, you say, oh, look, I'm so lean and fit, but I'm, purging. Right. So living with intention means practicing what I preach, right? And treating my internal self with the same compassion that I treat all of my clients. And that's incredibly important to me. Even if I'm facing challenges or I am in, like you said, that identity of that 400-pound kid, if I'm the identity of the little girl who just has to figure it out on her own, having compassion for her. Instead of being like, oh, why do I keep doing this? Right? Because that doesn't work. So practicing what I preach, having compassion for myself as much as others.
Love it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Where do we find you?
You can find me at mindsetofmatter.com or on Instagram at Mindset of Matter Coaching. If you want to throw another podcast into the mix, Mindset Mirror Connection podcast, or if you're interested in my views on dating and relationships, you can find me at Dating Deja Vu podcast.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay.
Awesome.
If this episode brought you value, please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave us a review. We are not normal. We are intentional.